Hi everyone, my name is Sarah, and a few years ago I worked at a gas station. I was a cashier and handled payments from customers. I mostly worked the night shift since it paid more per shift. That day, I arrived a little earlier than usual, and there was already a customer waiting. A man. He often came to our station. He was pretty much a regular, but the weirdest part was that he only ever showed up at night when I was working. This time, since I arrived early, I immediately noticed him sitting in his old Nissan. Was he waiting for me? That was the first time I realized this man acted strangely, creepily even. He wore an old suit. His blazer was brown, and sometimes he wore a hat. He looked to be about 50. As soon as I changed clothes and stepped behind the register, he got out of his car and walked into the store. He spent a long time choosing something and kept glancing over at me. I'd never noticed that before, but now his behavior had caught my attention. I used to think he just stopped by on his way home from work. That's why he came so often. But now it felt like he had other reasons. He picked up a sandwich and came to the counter. This time, he simply said, "Hi," like we were old friends. I didn't respond. I just waited for him to pay. "That'll be $3, I said. He slowly pulled out his wallet and asked, "How was your day?" I didn't even know what to say. "Fine." He kept going. "You go to college, right? Somewhere near that Chinese restaurant?" That was it. I'd had enough. I told him I didn't want to share personal information with a stranger. He looked at me, and his expression changed. He clearly didn't like my answer, but tried to hide his reaction. He paid for the sandwich and left. I really hoped he got the message, that I didn't want to talk to him, and that he wouldn't come back. The next few hours were quiet. Around 2 a.m., a trucker showed up, and then a guy in a sedan. The night was calm. I forgot to mention, I live in a small town. I won't say the name to keep my privacy. The gas station was 10 miles outside town. All around it was just forest, and there's a lumber mill nearby. My shift ended at 6 a.m., so I just had a few more hours to go. Since it was usually slow at night and the pay was better, it was honestly a great job. I was watching YouTube videos when I noticed headlights approaching. Another customer. At first, the lights were too far to recognize the car, but soon I realized who it was. That same guy. Again. Oh great, I thought. I didn't want to deal with him, or even see him. He got out of his car, lit a cigarette, and just stared at me. What the hell was he doing? I gestured at him to put the cigarette out. He ignored me, just kept smoking and watching me. What a creep. I started filming him in case I got in trouble later. I hit record and stepped outside. I asked him again to put out the cigarette. He looked at me, then finally flicked it away. He got back into his car and drove off. It was super creepy and weird. He came all the way out there just to watch me. I texted my friend about what happened, but she was already asleep and didn't reply. I didn't want to call my boss at night either. He wouldn't have liked that. So I told myself, if he comes back again, I'll call the police. Another hour passed. I couldn't stop thinking about that man. His stare, the way he smoked. It made my skin crawl. I just wanted to go home and tell my boss in the morning, but I still had 3 hours left on my shift. I put on my headphones and played some music. Surely no one else would show up. About half an hour later, I saw headlights again. Please just pass by. Thankfully, the car kept driving. I went back to doing nothing. Around 10 minutes later, I started to doze off. Sleeping on the job was forbidden, but I just nodded off for a few minutes. When I woke up, I saw that the front door was open. Someone must have come in. My first thought was that the boss might find out and cut my pay. I got up to close the door, and then I heard something. A noise from the back room. Something fell. Was someone back there? I stood behind the counter and listened closely. My phone was on the table. I couldn't reach it. Maybe I imagined it? I didn't want to take any chances, so I waited a bit. Okay, maybe it was nothing. I sat back down and grabbed my phone. I wasn't going back there. I was too nervous. I checked the time. Almost time to go home. Then, my phone rang. Unknown number. Simon. Who's Simon? I didn't know anyone by that name. I answered and asked who it was. Silence. Just heavy, weird breathing. Who is this? "What do you want?" The breathing got faster. I hung up. Then something hit me. I called the number back. What the hell? The phone started ringing. From inside the back room. He was back there. I ran outside and called the police. They showed up quickly. I told them someone was in the storage area. They searched everything but found no one. The only way to know what happened now was to check the security footage. I couldn't calm down. It felt like a nightmare. I had only fallen asleep for a couple of minutes, and someone had been right there. He touched my phone. That thought made me nauseous. I threw up. The police sealed off the station and told me I could go home. I got in my car and hit the road. Then I saw it, parked on the shoulder. A car I'll never forget. That same damn car. I slammed on the brakes and didn't even look at it at first. Then I stepped out and looked through the window. On the passenger seat was a stun gun and a photo of me. I froze. I went into shock. I barely remember what happened after that. I think I drove back to the officers and told them what I found. After that, tears, fear, therapy. My boss gave me a payout, but I couldn't work there anymore. They never found that man. I still think about what he planned to do to me. A million horrible possibilities went through my head, each one scarier than the last. My name is Zach. I'm 24 years old, and I work as a delivery driver in Castle Rock, Michigan. I usually work night shifts because the pay is better. Sometimes I even get tipped, probably because people don't realize that working at night is easier since there's no traffic. But that night, I got the toughest order of my life. I never could have imagined that I'd remember that night forever. The night went as usual. I delivered a couple of burgers to a motel and one pizza to a small neighborhood. I was just about to head home when a new order came in. The time was 3:17 a.m. What was strange was that I had already marked myself as unavailable in the app, so someone else should have gotten the order. The address was way out on the outskirts of town, but the tip was huge, $40. I decided to take it without thinking twice. The order had a note, "Leave the food on the porch." I drove to the supermarket to gather the order, but I didn't even notice right away what exactly I was supposed to buy. A bunch of garbage bags, cleaning detergent, 10 cans of canned beans, and 10 liters of bottled water. The order also included rubber gloves and rope. It looked really weird when I was checking it out at the register. But then I saw there was also personal lubricant. And I figured these people probably needed this stuff for some kind of strange nighttime fun. I headed to the address marked in the GPS. It was in a really remote area. I turned off the main road onto a dirt path and drove into the woods. That's where I saw the house. It was an old one-story building that looked abandoned, but there was a light on in one of the windows. I got out of the car and took 2 of the bags with me. I placed them on the doorstep and heard a noise behind the door. Someone was standing there watching me. It was really weird. They were just waiting for me to leave, avoiding any conversation or interaction. The place felt seriously creepy. I went back to the car to grab the bottles of water and noticed the door had opened. Out of the darkness came a thin woman who bent down to pick up the bag, but then she suddenly turned her head toward me and clearly wasn't expecting to see me still there. She got startled and quickly went back inside. She probably thought I'd already left. I brought over the water bottles and placed them on the porch. I said loudly that the order was delivered in full. I was just about to leave when I noticed that the window with the light had dirty glass and was swarming with bugs. The light was flickering eerily. I thought it was really strange. I got into the car and wanted to get out of there fast, but the car wouldn't start. I tried a few times. Nothing. I decided to call my friend to come help tow the car. It had happened to me before, but never in such a creepy place. The front door opened again and the woman came out once more. She picked up the bottles and looked over at me. Her face showed clear annoyance, probably because I hadn't left yet. I decided to go over and explain that my car broke down and I'd be leaving soon. I walked up to the door and knocked, but no one answered. I could hear the woman walk up to the door, but she just stood there, watching me through the peephole. I said out loud that I'd be gone soon and walked back to the car. I looked at the window again and noticed an animal skeleton on the windowsill. It looked like a cat. Damn. I got into the car and tried to start it again. Suddenly, the light in the house went out, and now the place looked even scarier. It was strange that anyone lived there at all. I texted my friend to hurry up. About 5 minutes passed, and then I started hearing the sound of a hammer banging inside the house. And then I noticed that someone kept staring at me from that same window. Or maybe I just imagined it? I decided to take a short walk and step away from the house. I didn't go far and called my friend. He said he'd be there in about 10 minutes. At that moment, the light in the window came back on. I turned my head and saw a man in the window. He wasn't looking at me. His back was turned toward me. Tall, thin, he wasn't moving, just staring. And I knew for sure he hadn't been there before. I walked over to the car and stood behind it so I couldn't be seen. The man kept standing there, staring at someone in front of him. His gaze was tilted slightly downward. I tried to figure out what was happening inside the house, but from where I was standing, I couldn't see much. I decided to sneak a little closer. That family was really strange, and I wanted to know what they were doing. I walked up to the window and crouched down beneath it, trying to hear what they were saying, but I didn't understand a single word. I don't know what language they were speaking, but it sounded really strange. I thought about peeking inside the house through the window, but it felt risky. My car wouldn't start, and if the homeowner took it the wrong way, I wouldn't be able to escape. Suddenly, I heard a scream and a loud bang. What the hell is going on in there? Another bang and a lot of incomprehensible words. They were speaking in what sounded like a made-up language. I lifted myself up a bit and peeked inside. Oh God. On the filthy floor of the room, a woman was sitting, and the man was holding a hammer in his hands. Suddenly, the woman who had answered the door walked into the room and she saw me. The man immediately turned, and his face was full of rage. The light in the room went out. I bolted to the car as fast as I could. Come on, start. Please. The door opened. My hands were shaking with fear. The man came outside holding the hammer and started walking toward me. I turned the key and the engine roared to life. Reverse and full throttle. He ran after me and threw the hammer, but he couldn't catch me anymore. I got back on the road and headed straight for the city. On the way, I met up with my friend and told him everything. I was shaking from the shock. I couldn't believe something like this could happen in real life. We called the cops and showed them the house. About 10 minutes later, the man and woman, who didn't understand a word of English, were detained by the police, and the man had a wound on his leg, most likely from trying to defend his home. They also brought out another woman from the house. She was emaciated and covered in bruises. I looked inside the house while the door was open and saw the bag of supplies I had delivered. At that moment, chills ran down my spine, and I knew I'd never forget the time of that order. 3:17. Hi, my name is Charlie, and I work as a taxi driver. I used to be an ambulance driver, so I know the city really well. Most often, I work in the mornings and evenings because there are more rides and therefore more money. But sometimes I work at night, since there are very few drivers during those hours, and the pay is even better. That night, I rented a car and went out to work. I hadn't driven that car before. It was an old Nissan. I guess they gave it to me because people often take taxis drunk at night. Well, the car didn't look great, but what did I care? However, when I sat in the driver's seat, I realized I was wrong. The inside was dirty too, and it smelled strongly of mold. I got my first ride request and headed out to pick up the client. He was at a night bar. All right, my shift had begun. I was driving through the nighttime city in a pretty good mood, but that smell and the filth inside the car immediately dampened my working spirit a little. I noticed the rearview mirror was angled wrong and adjusted it. Oh shit, what was that? It looked like someone was sitting in the back seat. Maybe the shadows just fell that way and made the seat look like a human silhouette. It creeped me out a bit, and I kept glancing at the rearview mirror. At the bar, a passenger got in, and to my surprise, He was sober, most likely a waiter or a bartender. I dropped him off at home and immediately headed to the next pickup. It was a woman standing at a bus stop. She hadn't been able to catch her bus and called a taxi. She got in the car, and I was hit with the strong, toxic smell of her perfume. The woman was dressed oddly. She looked like a fortune teller. She wore a long purple dress and a huge necklace around her neck. She immediately noticed something was off about my car. "You have a dirty aura. Never get into this car again," she said. I asked what she meant. She closed her eyes, stretched her hand forward, and said the place was full of filth. "The energy here is dirty." She sat there with her eyes closed, and then suddenly opened them wide and turned her head toward the back. I looked in the mirror, and once again it seemed like someone was sitting in the back seat, but a second later, there was no one there. I asked the woman what that was, but she stayed silent for the rest of the ride. When she got out of the car, she turned to look at me just once, kissed her necklace, and went inside. That was creepy, and now I couldn't stop checking the mirror again and again. As I drove to the next pickup, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was sitting in the back seat. I'm not a religious man, but that night, all kinds of thoughts flooded my head. I decided I'd take one last passenger and then go home. The last passenger was the first one to sit in the back seat, and that gave me some relief. At least now I knew for sure someone was really sitting there. It was a young guy who got in near a park. He wasn't very talkative, which was honestly a good thing. But what threw me off was the address in the app. Why was he going to the suburbs, to an old abandoned factory? At that moment, I regretted not heading home earlier. The whole ride, the guy was silent, staring out the window. I glanced at him now and then. 4 times I looked at him, and his position didn't change. His head was turned to the right, but the 5th time I looked, I nearly had a heart attack. His head was turned straight ahead, and he was staring directly into my eyes. I tried turning on the radio, but it didn't work. Damn. As soon as we pulled up to the factory, the guy got out without paying. I got out too, and loudly told him he had to pay me. The guy kept walking straight ahead and didn't even look back. What was I supposed to do? Follow him into that creepy place? No, I didn't want to continue the strange shift any longer. I got back in the car, turned around, and headed to the lot. I dropped off the car and went home. Until morning, until I finally lay down and fell asleep, I kept thinking about that guy, the woman, and this car. What was all that? Just a few strange coincidences? Or something supernatural? It doesn't matter. I'm never working night shifts again.